In this Blender tutorial, we'll be creating these low poly hand-painted stylized sword models, and we'll be rendering this in Blender EV. So we'll start by modeling the low poly swords, and then we'll UV unwrap the swords so that we can hand paint them, and then I'll show you how to use Blender's texture painting mode to texture paint some cool stylized textures on the swords. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the finished tutorial project files, you can get that with the links in the description on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. Now I'm also going to be using a drawing tablet for the texture painting, and I'd highly recommend using a drawing tablet if you're able to, because it's just so much easier to use a drawing tablet for painting because you're able to make nice smooth strokes with the pen and you have better posture, and drawing tablet pens usually come with pen pressure so you can press down harder if you want to add more color. So I'm going to be using my little Wacom pad tablet in this tutorial, so I definitely recommend using a tablet if you're able to. And if you're interested in purchasing a drawing tablet, then I do have some Amazon affiliate links in the description to some tablets that I recommend, and those are affiliate links, so if you purchase something through my links, then I'll earn a small commission, but with no extra cost to you. So here I am in a new scene in Blender. My screencast keys will be right in here in the corner so you can see what buttons I'm pressing. So I'll just select everything, and I'll just hit X and we'll delete everything. We're now going to model the blade of the sword, so I'll go to the add menu, and we'll start by adding a cube. Let's scale the cube down. I'll just type in 0.5, and then I will press Ctrl A and apply the scale, so that's the new size. So let's now hit the 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I'm going to move the cube up by about 2 Blender grids. So you can see there's the grids in Blender if you look on front view, so I'm going to move it up by 2 grids. So I'll now go into edit mode, I'll go into wireframe, and I'll deselect everything, and I'll just hit the B for the box select, and I'm just going to box select the top of the cube. And I'm going to bring it up by about 7 grids. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 grids. So that's going to be the length of the blade. Now if I go back into the solid view and look on this on side view, I want to squish it down because it's way too thick. So I'll hit the A key to select everything. I'm going to scale it on the Y axis, and I'll type 0.3 and then hit enter. So that way it's a lot more thin. But it is a stylized sword, so I do want it to be somewhat thick. So I now want to add a loop cut right about here, so then we can merge the top part into the center so that it's pointy on the top. So I'll hit Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I'll drag a loop kind of up to about here. And if you go to front view, it should be just maybe a little bit lower than that first grid there. And then I also want to add a loop in the center here, so I'll hit Ctrl R, and I'll left click and right click so the loop is in the center. Now what I'm going to do is hold down the Z button and go to wireframe. I'll just deselect everything, and I'll hit B for the box select. And we're going to box select these vertices and these vertices, and I can double tap the G key, which will activate the edge slide, and I'll just push them there into the bottom. Then I want to select everything because we have overlapping vertices, so select everything. We're going to hit M, and we're going to merge by distance. And this way it'll merge those vertices together. Let's save our project, so I'll click on File and Save. And I'll just save this as Stylized Sword in my file with my project files, and I'll just save Blender file. So then hit Ctrl S as you're working on the project to save it. So I'll go back into edit mode of the object, and I want to make the side of the sword really sharp, so we'll click here to go to the face select, and I'm going to hold down the shift key and just select these 4 faces, so these 2 on this side and this side, and we're going to scale them on the Y axis, and I'll type 0 and enter. So you can see now the side of the sword is sharp, and then we can select everything and hit M again and merge by distance, so it gets rid of those 5 extra vertices. Now what I'm going to do is go to the edge select, and I'm going to select this edge, go here to the back, and shift select this edge, and I want to kind of make the flat part of the blade. So what I'm going to do is press Ctrl B, so hit Ctrl B, and now you can see we can kind of move the blade out like that. So click to place it about there. Let's also go here to the vertex select. We're going to select that vertex there and that vertex there, and I'll hit G to grab and bring it up on the Z axis. And let's also go into wireframe. We're going to box select the entire top, and to make it look more stylized, we're going to scale it up on the X axis just a little bit, and then you could also box select the bottom and scale it down on the X axis a little bit. So the sword looks a bit more stylized because it's thicker up here. Now you can see if I look on this on side view, it kind of gets bigger here and then goes back down, and I want to make this entire side flat. So what I'm going to do is go to top view by hitting 7. We'll deselect everything, and we'll go into wireframe, and I'm just going to box select all these vertices here. So you can see those are that side, that entire side there of the sword. So we'll go back into wireframe, and I'm going to scale it on the Y axis by 0 and then enter, and then deselect everything. We're just going to box select this entire side on this side of the X axis, and again scale it on the Y axis by 0 and hit enter like that. So if we go back to solid view, you can see the entire thing is flat. And then maybe just scale the entire thing up a little bit on the y-axis to make it a little bit more thick to kind of give that stylized look. And one more thing I might do is just select these faces and also select these faces, and then I think I will scale them down on the x-axis just a little bit, so it's a little bit smaller. So that's going to be it for the blade. So let's now create the cross guard. So I'll go to the add menu, we'll just add a cube, and I'll bring the cube up. I'll go into edit mode and I'll scale the cube down and just move it over here. And let's go to the face select. I can select this face and we'll hit X and delete the faces because I want to add a mirror modifier and merge them together. So I'll click here to go to the modifiers. We'll click on add modifier and I'm going to add a mirror modifier. We'll select everything and we need to turn on the clipping button so it merges with the mirror, and then I'll move everything together into the x-axis so it merges with the mirror, and then I can pull that out. So I'll pull it out about there. Let's go to front view, and I'm first going to bring this out by about one grid, and then I will go to the face select. We're going to select this face. We'll go back to front view, and I can extrude this out by maybe just another half a grid or a little bit farther, so something like that. And let's also scale the entire thing down a little bit so it kind of gets thinner as it goes to the end, and then I'm going to bring it up so that it's more flat there. And just to make sure it's fully flat, we can go into wireframe, deselect everything, and we can just box select the top here, and we can scale it on the z-axis and type 0 and enter to make sure that's fully flat. So now you can see it comes up a bit and gets smaller as it goes to the end there. We'll go back into edit mode. I'll hold down the Alt key and select that loop there, and I'll press Control B to give it a bevel. Let's bring this out, and then I can scroll my mouse wheel maybe 2 or 3 times, and then just click to place that right there. So now it looks a bit more smooth. I could also select everything and maybe bring everything into the mirror a little bit. So I now want to apply the mirror, so just click on the drop down here and click on apply to apply the mirror, and then I want to add a few more modifiers. So I'll click on add modifier, and I'm going to add a bevel modifier to kind of bevel out the edges. So let's turn the segments up to like a 4, and then I can hold down the shift key and drag that amount and just make it a really small value so we have a tiny little bevel there. All right, maybe make it a little bit smaller, and then just use the object context menu and we'll shade the object smooth. And then to kind of flatten up the edges and make the flat spots look a bit nicer, I'll click on add modifier, and we're going to search for the weighted normal. So you can see without the weighted normal, it just looks a bit more smooth there on the reflections, but with the weighted normal, it kind of flattens up the flat faces. That looks a bit nicer. Let's hit Control S to save. We can also select the cross guard there and just move it up there inside the blade. So I now want to add a few more objects, so I'll hit Shift C to make sure the 3D cursor is in the center of the scene, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to add a cylinder. We're going to be using the cylinder to make another little piece there underneath the cross guard. So I'll go into edit mode, we'll go to front view, let's go to wireframe, we're going to deselect everything and just box select half of the cylinder, and we can just delete the vertices. We'll now click on add modifier, and we can just add a mirror modifier. So then turn on the clipping button, select everything, and kind of move it in, and then bring it out, and you can see it's merged with the mirror. So I'll now scale it way down and bring it in here. We can go back to object mode and just bring it up on the z-axis. Let's go to solid view. We can go back into edit mode and just scale it down a little bit so it's a little bit smaller than the cross guard. And then also scale it down on the z-axis so it's more flat. And let's go back to object mode and just bring it up a little bit. So just like that. Go back into edit mode, maybe scale it down just a little bit and bring it in. All right, so something like that. And then I will hold down the Alt key and select these loops here on the bottom and hit the F key to fill a face there. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So we'll now click on the drop down and apply the mirror. And then if we select this object and then shift select the other object there for the handle, I'll press Control J to join it together into one object. So now you can see it has the same modifiers and it's joined together into one object. So now I want to add one more little piece before we get to the sword handle. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to add another cylinder. Let's scale the cylinder down and kind of bring it up like that. Scale up a bit more, and then we can go into edit mode and scale it down on the z-axis. Scale it down even farther, bring it up so it's pretty small like that. We'll go to the face select. We're going to select this face. We'll go to front view and we'll just zoom into the object, and we're going to extrude it out and then scale it down a bit, and extrude it out and scale it, and then extrude out again and scale it down. So something like that. So now we'll select everything and scale it up just so it's big enough, but not too big so it doesn't go outside of that object. And then I can also scale it on the x-axis, and we're going to make it a bit longer like that. All right, and maybe scale the entire thing up on the z-axis, just like that, and then we can shade the object smooth. So then select this object and shift select the other object and hit Control J so it's joined together into one object. Now you can see that there's some kind of weird shading issues, and this is because of the bevel. So if we go to the bevel, we have this angle limit, and so we can turn up the angle angle limit, and you can see if I turn the angle limit all the way to 0, it's going to add a bevel to every single edge here. But I want to turn the angle limit up so it only adds the bevel to really sharp areas. So let's keep on turning the angle limit up so that it looks good. So maybe about a 45 looks pretty good. So I'll keep the angle limit method to 45. And maybe I'll bring this object down just a little bit more so it's a little bit longer. So let's now model the handle. So to model the handle, I'll go to the add menu and we are going to add another cylinder. Let's go into edit mode and I can scale the cylinder way down. We're going to zoom into the cylinder and we will bring the cylinder up and also scale it down so it's a bit smaller and just stick it right there in the center. And then if we select this face, we'll delete the face because we're going to be adding a mirror modifier. So we'll click on add modifier and let's just add a mirror modifier. And instead of the x-axis, we want to mirror it on the z-axis so it's going down. Also turn on the clipping button and then bring it down and bring it back up to make sure it's merged with the mirror. Let's now click on the top face and we'll go to front view and I'm going to scale it down just a little bit and bring it down, and then we can extrude it and then we'll scale it a little bit and extrude it and scale it again like that, and then extrude again and scale it down, and then finally just extrude up just a little bit like that. So you can see kind of the shape that we're getting. So now I'm going to add an array modifier. So click on add modifier. We're going to search for an array modifier. So we're going to array out those pieces. Now the problem with this is that we have a face right here and we don't want that face. So we're going to select the face and hit X and we're going to delete the faces. So I want to array it up and down. So if we go right down here to the array settings, instead of the factor X, we want to turn up the factor Z. So we'll turn the factor Z to 1 and the factor X is going to be 0. And now I can continue to turn up the count and I'm going to turn up the count to 8. So now you can see we kind of have that sword hilt. Now I definitely want to play around with the shape of it because it's like going in too much and I just want to fix the shape. First, let's just shade it smooth so it looks a bit better, and then we'll go into edit mode, and because we're using modifiers, we don't have to edit each one. We can just edit this half side and it's going to mirror and array all of them. So we'll go to front view, let's hold down the Alt key and select that loop there, and then we can kind of scale that up a little bit, and then hold down the Shift and Alt key and select that loop there and scale that up a little bit. We can just kind of fix the shape of it, maybe select this loop again and scale it up just a little bit. We can also select everything and scale it down on the Z-axis and maybe bring it down, and I think I will smooth it out just a little bit by adding a loop cut, so hit Ctrl R, and what I can also do is hold down the Alt key, select that loop, and press Ctrl B to add a bevel. I can scroll my mouse wheel just to add like one cut there, and then I can also double tap the G key with a loop selected just to kind of make it nice and smooth. So that's pretty good for the sword handle. One more thing that I want to do though is kind of flatten it out and scale it up a bit. So we'll select the object, go back into edit mode, and we're going to scale it on the Y-axis just to make that more flat. And then if I go back to object mode, I can scale the entire thing up a bit and bring it down. Let's scale it up a bit bigger, bring it down just like that so we have a much bigger sword handle. Maybe scale it down and bring it up a bit. And then if we go into edit mode, maybe let's scale it up a little bit more on the Y, and you could also scale it up a bit on the X. So now let's model the pommel, which is that little circular bit on the very end. So again, hit Shift C so the 3D cursor goes into the center. That way when I go to the add menu, I can add a new cylinder, and the cylinder is in the center. So I'll go into edit mode and we're just going to scale the cylinder way down. If I go back to object mode, we can bring the cylinder down here to the end, and we'll go back into edit mode. So we're going to start by modeling a very basic shape for the pommel, and then we'll add some bevels to kind of smooth it out. Let's start by scaling it down, bring it up here, and just bring it inside the other object. We can hold down the Alt key and select that loop and scale it down, and then hold down the Alt key, select that loop, and we'll scale it up and bring it up. So this is going to be a round circular bit, but I'm just going to model the very basic shape of it first. So we'll extrude this out and kind of scale that down. Then I can extrude this down just a little bit farther like that. And then I can extrude it out and scale it up a little bit. And then we'll extrude this piece down just a little bit. So this is going to be circular. Then it's going to be a bit more straight here and a little bit round. And then right here at the end, it's going to come out a bit and then go back down. So we'll extrude this out and we'll scale it up, bring it down like that. And then we'll extrude out again and scale it way down. Maybe bring that down a little bit. You can also Shift Alt, select that loop, maybe bring it down a little bit. But we can now add some bevels to round it out. So I'll hold down the Alt key, select that loop there, and hit Ctrl B to add a bevel. And I'll scroll my mouse wheel so there are many cuts, and we'll just make this nice and circular. So I'll just click to place that there. And then I can zoom in here, Alt select that loop, and hit Ctrl B, And we're just going to have a couple of cuts, so just like that there. And then hold down the Alt key, select that loop there, add another bevel there. We'll select that loop there. And we're going to add another small bevel there with a few more cuts. Select that loop there and add another bevel. Just to kind of smooth that out there so you can kind of see the shape we're getting. And we're going to do the same thing here to kind of round it out nicely. So select that loop there, give it another bevel. And this one, we're going to add a lot of cuts, so it has a lot more geometry. So I'll just place that about there. And then select that final loop there and add a bevel there and just make it nice and round at the end. All right, go back to object mode. We will shade the object smooth. And there we go. We now have a nice pommel for the end there of the sword. And I think I will scale the entire object up a little bit and bring it down here just like that. Go into edit mode, select that loop there, and we can extrude it up and scale it down just so it goes there into the handle. Now I do think the proportions are off just a little bit, so I want to make the sword a little bit bigger, so we'll just scale this entire thing up a bit and bring it up a bit. You could also go into wireframe, select this top part and bring it down a little bit. And then also I think that the handle is a bit long, so if we go into edit mode, I can scale it down the Z-axis, maybe scale the whole thing down a little bit. Let's zoom into the handle and kind of bring it down a little bit. Go back to object mode and kind of bring the entire thing up just a little bit, and then maybe scale it down a little bit. And then if I select this piece, I'll bring it up. So it looks a little bit better, more like a stylized sword. So let's now UV unwrap all the objects so that we can do the texture painting. So I'll click over here to go to the UV editing workspace, and we'll select the first object. We'll go into edit mode. We're going to select everything, and you can see the UV unwrap is quite messed up. So we'll hit U, and we're going to unwrap, and we're going to do the smart UV project. Now here on the island margin, I'm going to go with a 0.01. and click on unwrap. This way, by turning up the island margin, it's going to make sure that there's a little bit of space in between the islands. Now we can definitely fix this to make it look a bit better. So I want to use as much of the texture space as possible. So I want to make the islands as big as possible. So I'll select everything and I'll rotate it and scale it. And you can see by rotating it here, I can make it a little bit bigger. So I'll kind of rotate that over, scale it up, but I don't want to move it out of the space of the UV islands. So just make sure it's still inside that square there. All right. And then you can deselect everything and you can hit the L key to select the linked vertices and kind of move this around just like that. And then you can see right here, there's this little weird spot here, and we actually don't need this. If I go into edit mode of the object, let's just make this a bit bigger. Let's go back to object mode, select this piece and hit H to hide it. And then go back into solid view. You can see we have some overlapping vertices here. So let's go to the face select and we can just select any of these faces and just delete the faces. We don't need any of these faces down here. That can just be hollow inside. So I'll hit Alt H to unhide the objects. And if I go into edit mode, select everything, that is a bit better. So we'll go back to object mode. I can hit H to hide this object, and we'll do the next one. So I'll select this object, go into edit mode. I can select everything, and you can see it's overlapping, so we need to fix that. So I'll hit U, unwrap, and again, use Smart UV Project. We can use 0.01 on the island margin and unwrap that. And that's going to be fine. So we'll hide this object. Now for this one here, you can see we still have the modifiers. And so we actually need to apply it so that we can texture paint all of the object. So if I go here to the modifiers, click on the drop down and just apply this, and also apply the array. So it's all geometry. So then select everything. We can hit U and unwrap Smart UV Project and click on unwrap, and that is good. So we'll hide this object. The last object, we'll go into edit mode, select everything. We'll hit U, unwrap, Smart UV Project, and click on unwrap. And that will be fine for painting. So I can hit Alt H to unhide all the objects. Now before we do the texture painting, I'm going to go up here to the render settings and I'm going to turn the render engine to Eevee because we'll be using Eevee. But of course you could use cycles if you want to. But to kind of get that stylized look, we're going to be using the real-time engine. And then also let's turn on the ray tracing here just because it'll make it look a bit more realistic. So let's now click over here to go to the shading workspace. And we're going to first start by painting the blade. So I'll select the blade. We'll click on new to add a new material, and I can just call this blade. So we'll now go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for an image texture because we need to create an image to paint on. Now the color is going to go into the base color because we're going to be painting the base color. Let's now click on new to create a new texture, and I can call this blade. Now here in the width and height, I want to go with a 2K resolution image so it's a bit higher quality. So I'm going to click on the width, drag down to select the height as well and let go. And then if I click here at the end, I can hit the star or the asterisk and then type 2 and then enter. That's going to times the number by 2. So instead of it being 1K texture, it's going to be a 2K texture, which is 2048. So punch in 2048, we'll just leave it as a black color because we can just override the colors. We can just use a fill tool to fill it, and I'll just click on new image. So now we have our blade image. So we can now just click here to go to Blender's texture painting mode, and I'll zoom in here to the blade. And so here we have the UV editing, and so we can paint on the flat image if we want to, but I'm just going to close this just to get it out of the way, so make it really small. So this is now in full screen, and let's also click here to change the size here of the brushes. Let's make the brushes bigger. And also, if you're using an older version of Blender, then the brushes might look different. You might have some brushes here on the side panel, but with the new Blender update of version 4.3, they've added some new brushes here, and they've put the brushes right down here. So to follow along, make sure you're using Blender 4.3 or a newer version. Let's also click here on this button and click on names, because I do like to see the names in the texturing. Now, before we do the painting, I do want to create a color palette so that we can use all the colors that we want. And then if we want to go back or maybe paint away, paint the default base color, we can go back to it. So let's just make this a bit smaller. Let's scroll down here, and we're going to go to color palette. Let's click on new to create a new color palette, and this one I can call blade. So now we can create all the different colors that we want for the blade. So let's first make a very black color, so fully black, and then click on the plus here, and that's going to add the color to the color palette. Let's now make another one which is fully white, and then click on the plus here to add another one which is fully white. Now I want to create the base color. So for the base color here, we're just going to go with like a gray color. And if you want to use the same exact color that I'm using for the base color, you can click on the color here and go to the hex, and you can type 7D, 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 and then hit enter. So that is the exact color that I'll be using. We'll click on the plus here to add a new one. So now I have black and gray and white, and you can reorganize these by clicking on the arrows here to adjust them. So now we have black, gray, and then white. Now let's also make a mid-gray color. So I'm going to click on the color here, go to the hex, and I'm going to type in 636363 and hit enter. And then we will click on the plus here to add a new color, and I can click on the arrow to kind of move it over. Then we'll create one more, which is a really dark gray. And for this one, we're going to use 3C, 3C, 3C and hit enter. That's a really dark one. So we'll click on the plus here, and then we're going to click on the arrow to bring it over. So we now have black, we have 3 grays, and then we have a white. Let's hit Control S to save. So now I want to fill this. So to fill it, we're going to go to the fill tool, and we'll go to the fill tool, and then we're going to use this one here, which is the light gray, and then we can just click on the sword to fill it. And if you go over here, you can see now it's filled that all in. So now for the texture painting, I'm going to be using my drawing tablet, my Wacom pad tablet. So I want to start by painting in all of the details, which are going to be on the entire sword. So we can use the symmetry here by going here and clicking on the X and the Y. And this way, when we start to paint on one side, it's going to mirror it over on the X and Y. So let's click on this here to go to the paint hard. We're going to paint hard, and then let's just choose this dark color. And then let's choose this mid-gray color here, so the one in the center. And we're just going to start to go along here, and we're just going to paint this all in here. And you can see if I go to the other side, you can see it's mirroring over to the other side. And if I paint here, it's also mirroring over. So that way we can just paint a quarter of the sword, and it's going to do the rest of the work for us. So we're just going to go along here and just paint that all in, and just try to get it pretty close to the edge there. And then once you get pretty close, you can turn down the radius of the brush to make it smaller, and you can just go along here and just kind of paint the very ends there like that, and then just fill that all in. So because this is pretty repetitive, it's kind of just the same thing. I'm not going to go through every single process. I'm not going to show you every single thing I'm doing. I will skip a little bit here and there. So right here, I'm just going to go through and fill the rest of this flat part of the sword. And right here at the very end, I'm just kind of finishing that up. So there you go. Now you can see it's a bit lighter here and a bit darker here. So the next thing that I want to do is kind of add like a light edge to it to kind of give it a stylized look and make the sword look a bit worn and old, and also just give it kind of like a light reflection. So let's go to the paint soft, and we're going to click here on our palette here to go to the full white. So you can see why the palette is so useful. I can just click on this here, and now I have a full white brush. And let's also turn the radius down a bit and maybe turn the strength down a little bit. And now I can go here and I can just start to paint like a lighter area just here along the edge, and maybe turn up the strength of my brush a little bit. So go along here. And I'm not concerned with it being super perfect. If a few spots are a little bit blotchy, that kind of adds to the hand-painted stylized look of it. So if it's a little bit wobbly or a little bit blotchy in some areas, I really don't mind. So we're just going to go along here, and in all of the corners or the edges, we're going to paint this light color. And it's very useful that we're using the symmetry because we don't have to do the entire thing. We can just paint a quarter of the sword and then it'll do it for the rest of it. And I'm right here at the very end, so just filling that in there. So now you can see we kind of have that cool light reflection there on the sword. So let's just continue to do that for all of the other edges. All right, and then go along here. And then also we can do it here on the front or on the side of it. So if I hit 3 on the numpad to go to side view, I can zoom way in here, and on the very sharp part of the sword, I can do that. So just go along here and fill that in with the white color. I think I'll turn my brush strength all the way up to 1 because this is a soft brush. We're using the soft brush, and also because I have this button turned on, it's using the pen pressure, so I can press down lightly or I can press down really hard and it's going to add more color. That's also what's really useful about using a drawing tablet. And right down here we could maybe even kind of rotate this over a little bit so it kind of merges. All right, like that, and then we'll continue to go down and do the rest of the sword. And if you kind of zoom out and then make your radius a little bit smaller, let's turn the radius maybe to just like a 12. Now the brush is a little bit smaller, but we're kind of zoomed out farther. So I can kind of go along here and just do it a little bit faster. Now, one important thing at this stage is you don't want to close Blender, because if you close Blender, even if you save the file, it's not going to save this image data. Now, what we could do is we could actually save a backup of this, even though we're not done painting. So you can click on image and then click on save or save as. And in my project files, I can call this blade, save it as a PNG image, and click on save as image. Then we can paint more, and then we can override this image. That way, if for some reason you accidentally close Blender or it crashes or something, you're still going to save your progress. So let's make this smaller and let's keep on painting. Now, some of these areas I think could be a little bit thicker, just because again, we're going for that kind of stylized look. So along here on some of these edges, I'm just going to make them a little bit thicker. And right here on these corners, I could maybe round this out just to add even more light areas. You could even purposefully kind of add a little bit of lumpy spots here and there, just to make it look like maybe the sword was bented up or kind of dinged up. Now I also just want to add a little bit of color variation. So what I'm going to do is click here to go to the darkest gray, and then we'll make the brush strength or the brush radius a bit bigger. And then what I'm going to do is turn the strength way down so it's really, really gray or subtle. Maybe turn that up a little bit. So now what I can do is just kind of go along here and just kind of paint in some little dark areas. Let's also turn off the X and Y symmetry. So just turn that off, and now it won't look different on either side. So just go along here, little patchy areas where it's slightly darker, just to give it a little bit of color variation. Make that a little bit darker. So it is a little bit subtle and hard to see, but it'll definitely add just a little bit to the painting. So go along there. You can kind of see if I look at it maybe from that view, you can see there's some little darker areas here and there. So I'll just go along here, make some little darker areas. Here on the bottom, you could also just make it even darker like that, sort of like giving it a slight ambient occlusion look because it's closer to the object, and then just kind of go along here and add a little bit of darkness to the other side. It almost makes it look like there's a tiny little bit of dirt over the surface of the object as well. Now let's also turn back on the X and Y, and we're going to click here to go to the fully white color. And we can now start to add just a little bit more like cracks and little dents and things. So I'll turn the brush strength up, and we'll turn the radius back down. And actually for this part of the painting, I don't want to use the symmetry, so I'm going to turn off the X and Y just so we can paint on one side and it won't be mirrored over. So now what I'm going to do is kind of go along here, and let's just make kind of a little dent or something like that, kind of merge that together with the light spot. But because we turned off the symmetry, it's not gonna have it on the other side. So let's go along there. Maybe I'll turn my brush radius up a little bit, and then just go along there and kind of make a little white patch. So that's pretty cool, like that. And let's just do a few more of them. So maybe like right down here, I'll make my brush a bit smaller, and I can add like a little scratch. So let's add a little bit of a scratch there, a white colored scratch there. Let's go up here to the top and we'll add another crack. So maybe if the sword like hit something really hard from above, it kind of got a little dent right here. So we'll add a little white spot there, just kind of coming down, and then it can just kind of end right there. And we'll go right over here and let's add kind of a little spot right here, which kind of comes out a little bit. Let's add some more of them. So if I like go down here to the center, we can add another one, and maybe this one is kind of going to split into two. So we'll have it kind of go like that. Maybe this is actually like a crack in the sword. All right, let's go down here and add like another one. So this one can kind of maybe be a little bit more curvy or random, and we'll do another something over here. Let's maybe do like a little scratch, which kind of comes here and then goes down. Then it can be thicker there in the middle, and then be a little bit more thin there at the end. Also up at the very tip, I could go to the tip of the sword and just go along here and fill it in with a bit more white, and then go to the other side and fill it in just a little. So this is basically the process of it. So I'm going to continue to go through here and just add a bit more little bits to the sword. Alright, so I'm finished with adding all those white details. So you can see I've added like some little cracks and things. So I'm just going to go down here, just kind of show you what I've done. If you want to maybe pause the video and go back and just kind of do the same thing that I've done. And I've done it here on the other side. So we're not done with the painting, but just to save a backup, I'm going to open up this panel here. We'll go to image and save as. And then you can see it's red there showing us that it's going to override the old file. So I'll click on save as image, and now that's going to be saved. So just in case Blender crashes, we haven't lost our progress. So what I'm now going to be doing is adding kind of like some little dark shadows on some of these cracks to make them look a bit more three-dimensional. So we're going to use the very darkest gray here in our palette. In the color palette, let's zoom in here, and I can turn the strength down quite a bit, maybe to like 0.5. And now I can go along here. That's actually a bit too low. Let's maybe turn the strength up to 0.8. That's a little bit better. So I'm just going to go along here and add just some little dark areas. Maybe I'll make my brush a little bit bigger. And also, I didn't mention this earlier, but if you want to erase, if you like have something that you don't like, you can go back here to the gray one, which is in the middle, and you can paint along here, and you can see it's going to erase it because that was the base color that we used behind it. So you can do it that way if you want to erase something. But let's go here to the very dark one, and then I can go along here and just kind of darken it in. So I'm going to pretty much do that all along here. So maybe like some areas here, maybe darken this in, make the brush a little bit bigger, turn the strength down. You can kind of go along here to kind of darken some areas to make it look kind of a bit banged up. So this part maybe looks like it's going back in a little bit. Maybe this part here, add like kind of a sharp darkness there, kind of like that. You could also do some along these areas if you want to. So you can see if I zoom out there, it looks a bit more three-dimensional and looks more interesting. Kind of gives it like a little fake shadow in the color. So again, you can see if I zoom out, it just adds a nice little effect. It is subtle, but it does really add to the sword. You could also use the fully black one if you want to, maybe turn the strength down a little bit and make an even sharper or darker crease there. But don't make it too dark. Another thing you could do is use the very dark gray one or a black one. And you could also add a few little cracks here that look darker. So maybe I'll actually use the fully black one because that's a little bit better. You could go along here and add just a few little cracks here, which are fully black. If you want to do that, that might look kind of nice. But mostly I'm just going to go along here using the very dark gray and just paint kind of a little bit of like a shadow or a crease there in some of these spots, kind of these corners here along here. So I'm just going to continue to do this for the entire thing because it is pretty repetitive, so I'm not going to show the entire process, but you can kind of just see what I'm doing, adding a little bit of darkness there. So I'm just going to do this for the entire sword, and I'll come back when we're finished. Alright, so I've just finished adding in all those little dark areas. You can kind of see I've added it to most of them. Just adding a little bit of variations, some dark areas here on the side and around the cracks. Now another thing that I want to do is add some little dark areas kind of here on the flat spots to make it look like there's kind of like some dents, like some hammer dents or something. So it looks like it's a battle-worn sword. So we're going to use this really dark gray one, and we're just going to go along here, maybe make the strength pretty small, and just go along here and add a little dark area. And I think actually for this one, maybe using the darkest black will work better. So use full black and just going around in a little bit of a circle like that, kind of adding a little dent there. Then we can also add a small highlight to this dent by going to maybe like the fully white one, turn the strength down, and just go along here and add kind of a little highlight to that dent there on the edge. So kind of like that. And I might go to the smear brush and just kind of smear it a little bit. So I'm going to go along here and just do a few of them. I don't want to do too many, but let's do a couple of those. So I'll go back to the paint soft. We'll use the fully black one. Let's go here to the other side of the sword, and I can go along here and just paint a little darker bit. And you don't even have to add the highlight if you don't want to. Maybe some of them could not even have the highlight. Just like that. Maybe go to the smear brush and just smear it so it's a little bit more smooth, kind of like that. And maybe I'll just do one more, but I don't want to do too many. So maybe like right up here, let's add another one. So now we can save this. So let's click here and drag out. So there's the finished painting. So we'll click on image and we'll click on save as. And again, we could just override the blade. So just click on save as image and it will override it. Let's go back here to the layout, and we can hold down the Z button and go into the material preview. And there we go. We have the base of the sword. Now let's go over here to the shading workspace, and let's go again into the material preview. And just to make it look a bit more like metal, we can turn the metallic all the way up to 1, so it's more reflective. And we'll turn the roughness way down to maybe around a 0.2. So now you can see it looks a bit more reflective and it's kind of shiny like a sword. So now let's do the next one, which is going to be the handle. So we'll select the handle, we'll click on new to add a new material. And actually this is the cross guard, not the handle. So here on the material name, I'll just rename this to cross guard. We'll go to the add menu. We're going to search for another image texture. We'll drop it here. We're going to click on new to make a new one. We're going to use the same 2K image, but this one we'll rename to cross guard. So we'll just click on new image and then we'll put the color into the base color. And also while we're here, let's make it metallic. So we'll turn the metallic to 1 and I'll turn the roughness down maybe to like a 0.1 or a 0.2. So it is kind of shiny. All right, so let's save this again, hit Control S and we'll go to texture painting. Let's zoom in here and we can now paint this. So the first thing that I want to do is fill it. And also before we forget, let's go here to the symmetry and we'll turn on the X and the Y symmetry, turn those both on so that when we paint, like if I go here to the paint soft and paint along here, you can see if I paint on one side, it's going to mirror it to the other side. So I want to create another color palette for the like shiny gold part. So right here you can see we have this color palette, but we can actually make a new color palette. So what we're going to do is click on this button here to create a new color palette, and you can see it says palette, and I'm going to rename this to cross guard. So now we can make all the colors that we want for the color palette. So first let's start by making a fully black color, and then we'll click on the plus to add a new color. And then for the next one, it's going to be a dark brown, and you can punch in the same hex code if you want to. So I'll be using 472400 and then add that as a new color. The next color is going to be kind of like this gold color, and the hex code is going to be FF8200. And then add that as a color palette. And then the next one is going to be kind of this pale gold. So this is going to be a hex value of FFC495, and then we'll add that in the color. Then we'll make a fully white one. So just make sure on the RGB, make sure that it's all turned to 1. So it's fully white. Then we'll add this as a fully white color. And then the last one here is kind of going to be more of a brownish gold color. So the hex code for this is A95600. We'll add this. And then also this one, I'm going to bring this one over. So it's right next to the brown. So we have black, we have kind of like some different brown ones and then a gold one, then a really light one and a white one. So now let's do the texture painting. So I'm going to go here to the gold one. And let's make this smaller so we have more space so we can see all the brushes. Let's go to the fill brush and then make sure we're using this color. And we'll just click there to fill that. And now what I want to do is I want to add kind of like a highlight on the edges to make it look like maybe the gold's been like rubbed away a little bit. So to do this, we're going to click here to go to the really bright one here, kind of this pale one. And then we'll go here to the paint soft. And then of course, make sure the symmetry is turned on. Make sure we're using that color. And now we can go along here. Let's start by going into the center so I can see the symmetry. We'll make our brush a little bit smaller and just go along here, turn the strength up a bit, and kind of paint a little highlight. So this highlight we're going to be adding to all of the edges and along here and also down. So I'll just come back to this once I've finished adding the highlight to the corners. So I've just finished this piece. So I've just gone along here and add the highlight. Now what I'm also going to do is go down here and I'm going to go along and just lightly add a little bit of a highlight kind of down there. And then as well as that, I'm going to go right here and add a little bit of a highlight. So I'll just go and add another highlight right there. Then what you can also do is go to the fully white brush and maybe turn the strength down a little bit. And if you want to, you could make a teeny tiny little highlight, which is even brighter in some spots if you want to, just along the very edges, kind of just make it pop out just a little bit more. So I kind of will do that just a little bit, adding a very subtle, even brighter highlight just on the very, very corners. So like there, up here. So I also want to add just a little bit of dark bits to make it look like maybe it has a tiny little bit of dirt or it's a little bit worn. So let's go here to the dark brown and we're going to turn off the symmetry. So turn off the X and Y and I'll make my brush bigger and then turn the strength way down. So we just have a really big brush, but it's really subtle. And just go along here and just add a tiny little bit of dark points kind of in the center here and there. Not everywhere, but just a few spots, just here and there, adding a little bit of darkness. So it looks like maybe some smudges or some dirt, and it adds a bit of variation to the color. All right, that's pretty good. So I do want to keep it pretty subtle. And also right down here, let's just add a little bit more, just like that. All right, so now what I'm going to do is turn back on the X and Y symmetry. And I'm now going to make the brush strength bigger. I'm still going to use the dark brush, but I'm going to make kind of like a crevice right down there in those little corners. So where it's kind of going back in, we're going to add like a bit of an ambient occlusion effect where it looks just a little bit dark there. So let's make our brush strength even more subtle. Just go along there and add just a tiny little bit of darkness right in there. Go along there. All right, you could also go to the smear brush real quick and kind of smear it if it's a little bit too sharp on the edges. All right, something like that. Right here, maybe smear that a little bit because it was a little bit too strong. All right, let's go back here to the paint soft and we'll go in here and just add a little bit of darkness. Maybe I'll make the radius a little bit bigger and turn the brush strength even farther down so it's more subtle. And let's go back up here to the top of the sword. And let's do kind of a similar thing right here. So kind of along the corners, just go along there and make it a little bit darker. All right, zoom out, see how that's looking. That's pretty good. So now let's turn off the symmetry. So turn off the X and Y, and I'm gonna go to this really bright color again. So the very like pale gold color. And I'm now gonna do kind of a similar thing like what I did for the sword. We're gonna add some little cracks here. So let's turn the strength up, keep the radius pretty small. And now what we're going to do is just go along here and just add a few little cracks. So like one down here, kind of going up and connecting. So we're going to pretty much do the same thing. I'm not really going to add those dark areas though around the cracks, but I'm just going to add a few light points. So like right there, let's do another one. Let's maybe add something kind of coming up here just to make it look more stylized, make it look a bit more worn, like it's a battle damaged sword, and it adds more visual interest. So something like that. So you can see just adding a few here and there. I'm not going to do too many, but I'm just going to add a few little cracks and things, and I'll come back when this is finished. And what you could also do is just add a few little subtle points here, which are like coming up to make it look a bit more dented or make it look like a bit of the metal's been kind of worn away. So go along there, just add kind of like a subtle bit right there. You can kind of see how that's looking, and I added another one right there and another one over there. So now I want to create some little diamonds which are going to be in the center here. So to create the diamonds, I do want to turn back on the X and Y symmetry. And now let's go to the dark gray. So let's actually use this gray here, so not the fully dark gray or the dark brown, just kind of this one here. And let's turn the strength of our brush way up. We can also hit the 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I'll make my brush smaller. And we can now just go along here. So there's the symmetry. So I'm going to make a few diamonds. So we'll have this going here and then going back in. And this makes it look really cool. Just adds a lot more visual interest to the sword. So we'll add a diamond there, kind of fill it in, and we'll fill the rest of it in later. But I want to get the points of the sword, or the points of where the diamond is going to be. So we'll do another diamond here, bring it up so it's about the same height, and then bring that back down, and then have it going down like that. So there's going to be 3 on this side, and because we have the mirror symmetry on, there's going to be 3 of these on the other side of the hilt. And then what we can also do is we can go to the hard brush, so paint hard, and we'll go along here, and that's the wrong color, so click back here to use the right color. And now that we've kind of added where we want it to be, we can fill it in a lot easier with the hard paint. All right, so fill that in there. All right, that's pretty good. Fill that in there. All right, and then I actually want to kind of sharpen this up here. So if I click back here to go to the base color, I can go along here and kind of sharpen that because it doesn't really have an eraser. There isn't really an eraser tool. There are these eraser tools right here, but these actually just make it transparent, so it's not actually erasing it. If you want to erase, you should just go back to the base color. All right, so that's good. Let's actually go to the smear brush and smear a few of these areas because you can kind of see where I kind of erased it. So I'll turn the strength up and just kind of smear that right there. All right, smear that right there. All right, so now what I'm going to do is go back to the paint soft. I'm going to use the dark color again, which we used before, and I'll just kind of paint a soft edge there to just kind of finish that up. So paint a soft edge on the end of the diamond. And then another thing that I want to do is just add like a darkness, kind of like a dark highlight or kind of a shadow, kind of right on this side. So I'm going to use this very dark gray or the very dark brown. That's what we're going to use it for. And I'll just go along here and add a bit of a shadow there. Now there's a problem with this. I need to actually hit Control Z to undo this because we don't want to mirror it. Because if we mirror it, then the shadow is going to be on the wrong side. So what I want to do is actually turn off the X symmetry, but keep on the Y symmetry. So now if I go along here, you can see if I paint here, zoom out, it's not going to be on this side, but if I look here, it's still going to be on that side. So we're just going to paint with the Y symmetry. Just add like a shadow there, so it kind of makes it look like there's an indent. Go along there, and we're going to do them all on the same side. Zoom out there, and now you can see that looks a lot nicer. It really makes the diamonds kind of pop out. All right, and that is going to be it. So let's save this image. So let's open this up here. There's our painting. We'll click on Image, and save as. And I'll save this in my project files as crossguard PNG and save that image. All right, let's go back here to the layout, and I'm just gonna see how that's looking. Looks nice and shiny. You could also change the matte cap here, or the HDRI, not the matte cap, but the HDRI. So maybe change it to a different HDRI so you can kind of see the reflections a little bit better. So let's click down here on this one. I'm gonna do the pommel. So let's go here to the shading workspace. We'll click on new to add a new material. I'll rename it to pommel. Let's add a new image. We're gonna search for an image texture. We can drop it down here. Let's click on new to add a new texture. Now this one, because it's really small, I'm just gonna do a 1K texture. So let's click and drag here and then let go. And then to use the default one again, so the 1K texture instead of a 2K texture, we're gonna hit /2. That's gonna divide it by 2. So we're basically doing math in Blender. So that number divided by 2, hit enter, and now it's 1024, which is the standard resolution for a 1K texture. Let's rename this to pommel, and then click on new image, and the color can go into the base color. We can also make it metallic and turn the roughness down to like a 0.1 or a 0.2. All right, there it is. So let's now go to texture painting, and we're gonna be using the same crossguard colors that we use there in the color palette. So we're gonna make this smaller so we have this in full screen. Let's go to the fill brush. We're going to use the same color here and just click there just to fill that. All right, that's good. And then let's turn on the X and Y symmetry again. So click here just to turn that on. This painting is going to be pretty easy. Let's click here to go to the paint soft, and it'll make my brush a little bit bigger. And let's click here to use the very dark brown. And I'll turn the strength down a bit. So we're just going to go along here in the cracks or in the crevices, and we're just going to kind of darken that in there. And we can also maybe darken this in just a little bit, keeping it pretty subtle like that. Also right around here, and also right down here on the very bottom, we'll go along here in circles and darken this in a little bit. All right, now let's click here to go to the very light one. The very light one is going to be like a highlight, and we'll go along here and add like a bit of a highlight here to the end. We can also add a highlight here. So just go along back and forth there, just popping that out and highlighting that, just like that. And that is really it. So it's really quite easy. So let's open up this panel here. We'll click on image and save as. We'll save it as pommel in our files and click on save as image. So if I go back here to the layout now, you can see we now have this really cool shiny pommel. If I go to the shading, I think what I want to do is turn the roughness up a little bit more. Go back here to the layout. So there we go, we just have one more. So we're gonna select the handle and let's go to the shading workspace. We'll add a new material and we'll rename this to handle. And then we'll go to the add menu. We're gonna search for an image texture, drop this here. We'll click on new. And this one again, I wanna make it 2K. So we'll click here, we'll do the asterisk or the star, hit 2 and enter. So it's a 2K image. We're gonna rename this to handle. You can make a color if you want. I'll just click on new image and the color can go into the base color. And I'll just leave the roughness how it is. So now let's click over here to go to texture painting. All right, so we'll make this smaller so we can see the 3D view in the full screen. So let's now click here to go to the fill brush, and I'm going to click here on the brown that we used, and I'm going to click here just to fill that. Now we're going to add like a bit of shadows and then also some highlights. So we're first going to use the fully black one, and we'll go to paint soft. And then also let's turn on the X and Y symmetry. So now if I go along here, we actually want to use the black one, go along here and kind of darken that in, darken that all in there. And we're just going to darken it in for every one here inside. So just where it's kind of going in, where there's a crevice, we'll make it darker. So just go along there, darken that in a little bit. And we don't need to worry about doing it for the other side because we have on the symmetry. And then right here at the very end, kind of darken that in. All right, that's looking pretty good. So now let's add a bit of a highlight. So for the highlight, let's just use this really light one here. We're gonna make the strength a bit less strong so it's more subtle. And then just go along here and just add a little bit of a highlight. So I'm just gonna tap really lightly. So just go along here, tapping just to make it a bit brighter. And along here, just like that, kind of zoom out, see how that's looking. Just adding highlights there to those little bits. And then if you want to, you can go to the smear brush. If you want to smear any areas, if they look a bit too strong, you can kind of smear them to blur them. All right, so there we go. Let's just save this image. So I'll just open this up here. We'll click on image and save as. I'll save this as handle, click on save. And now that we've saved the image, we can go back here to the layout. Let's just zoom out there. So now to finish this off, I'll just do a little bit of lighting. So I'll hold down the Z button, go into the rendered view so we can see how it's looking in the rendered mode. I'm gonna add an HDRI light. So we'll click here on the world properties. We'll click here on the color and we're going to choose environment texture, and then we'll open a texture. And I'm going to be using this autumn ground 1K HDRI from polyhaven.com, so I'll have a link in the description if you want to download it. So I'll click on it and click on open image just to give us some nice lighting. Let's also go here to the render properties, and I'm going to go here to the film tab and just turn on the transparent button so we can't see the HDRI. And then here on the view transform on the color management, let's change the look here to a very high contrast. So that's looking a lot nicer now. And then we can just add a few lights to add some highlights. So I'll go to the add menu and let's just add an area light, and I'll rotate the area light over. Let's go here to the light settings and I'll turn up the strength a bit so it's a bit brighter, maybe scale that up, make it quite a bit brighter like that, and just add like a few lights here to kind of give it some cool reflections. And you could maybe add one here on the back for kind of like a bit of a rim light. And I can click on this button here just to hide the overlays. So of course you could render this out, do some compositing. In the compositing, you could also add maybe like a glare node to add a bit of a glare, so when the sword moves it's a bit shiny, but I'll leave that up to you. I'm not going to cover that in the tutorial, but you could easily just pose this at a camera and get a nice render. So I'll just save the Blender file again, and that'll be it for this tutorial on how to create this low poly stylized hand painted sword. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the finished project files, you can get that with the links in the description on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. And my Gumroad store and Patreon page are great ways to help support the channel, and on my Gumroad and Patreon you can get other tutorial files, 3D models and assets, procedural materials, artwork project files, and lots more Blender content. So I do really appreciate your support. But I hope you found the tutorial helpful, and thank you for watching.